Newman present. If everybody who can, please rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Yes. All right, first off, has everyone had a chance to review the meeting minutes?
I make a motion to approve the meeting minutes of July 17th.
Second.
All those in favor?
Smith, aye.
Trance and I.
Human eye. All right, tonight we're going to start off with a APR with Padula. And did you want to get up and tell us why you're here?
Hi, I'm with the Department of Food and Agriculture, and my name is Trust,
Podium.
Oh, you can stand it.
We want to get you on camera.
Oh, great. I work for the Department of Agricultural Resources, and I've been working with the Padula family to put a restriction on their farm on North Row Road. It's a restriction that basically keeps the property in agriculture in perpetuity. So we're here tonight, or I'm here tonight, to have the town sign the last part of the document. The town has graciously given some funds towards the property and therefore is signing on as a co-holder on the document. Any questions?
We already went through this.
All right. Thank you.
I would welcome a motion.
Well, I make a motion to approve the APR on Padula property.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Smith, aye.
Trance and I. Yeah, I'm still here. It's been a long day.
All
All
right.
right, so you're all set.
Okay, so will you be mailing it to us, or have you already signed?
She wants us to sign any of the documents.
I'm a notary. Which is what?
Say, let's go for the time.
Conservation.
I just need to see your licenses, since I don't know you. You don't have them? I don't have it with me. Okay, so if your clerk could notarize, and you guys could mail the document to me? Or I can send you the address through Bill.
Okay.
Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right, thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and this is a joint meeting with the Zoning Board of Appeals and the Planning Board. So Chair Fox, would you like to call your board to order?
All right, I will call this meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals to Constituent to order. We'll take a roll call, please.
Curtin present.
Everett Pierce present.
Matthew Fox, present. But there's one other member here.
Mr. What's up, President?
Okay, thank you. We have a quorum. Thank you.
Chair Craney, would you like to call your meeting to order?
Yes, call the Sterling Planning Board meeting to order. Have a roll call too. We have me, we have Val. I think, is that it?
Mike Temple, present.
John
There's Mike.
Sandro,
Oh,
present.
there we go.
Eric
Thank
Newman,
you.
present.
We have a
Al
quorum.
Furbo, present.
We have a quorum.
All right, and we are joined by our town council, Carolyn Murray of KP Law, who will be giving us a presentation, and then there will be a question and answer session after that presentation. Carolyn?
Thank you. So hopefully everyone can see this, and hopefully, assume I just hit enter to advance to the next bill. Okay, great. So back about a month or so ago, through the town administrator, I was asked to come on down and, obviously the select board, the zoning board, the planning board all have some sort of role when it comes to zoning. So I was asked to sort of put together a brief presentation about roughly what each board's respective roles are. But every time I do a training of any sort, I always find it's better if there are questions, ask them along the way. Feel free to interrupt, because I think that's really when we get the most, out of the presentation, so to speak. So, if it's something that we're going to, get to later on, I'm happy to defer questions to the end as well, but, it's a fairly brief discussion, so I think we could entertain questions along the way as well. So, with that, we always have the disclaimer that we're really just here tonight to talk about Chapter 40A and generally what the respective board's rules are. We're not here to talk about any specific project, so if there's something that's foremost in any of your minds, let's just talk about these things in generalities, because obviously, for example, if you're the zoning board or the planning board, if you've got a project that is before you currently or you anticipate is coming before you, you really should be basing all of your decisions based on information that is presented to you within the context of that public hearing. So we really should be talking about specifics about it here today, but certainly we can talk about process and some larger issues. So I wanted to start sort of with the beginning and the administration of Chapter 40A of the Zoning Act, and really some of the components of it. That at the local level, we certainly have Chapter 40A at the state level, which tells us, kind of sets the parameters within which the town can act. And then under the auspices of Chapter 40A is when we then adopt our own municipal bylaws. The bylaws then tell us how we're going to divide the town up into various districts, where we're going to allow certain uses of land, and how we're going to allow them, whether it's something that might be allowed by right or whether it might be allowed by special permit or site plan review. So it also then, within that document, tells us who is the proper authority for each of those types of permits that would get issued within the town. And by and large, this is going to fall to the zoning board and the planning board, but sometimes there's overlap amongst the boards.
Carolyn, could
Yes.
you explain the difference between by right and special permit?
Certainly. So when I say by right, so if you imagine for a moment your zoning use tables, where we will have all the various zoning districts listed, and we will also have uses listed by residential, and we'll say single-family home, two-family home, multifamily, business uses, industrial uses, categories where we identify the types of uses that we say are allowed within the town of Sterling. If it is allowed by right, meaning there is no special permit of any sort that use requires. So if you own property in a residentially zoned district, a single-family house is absolutely allowed. You don't need to go to the zoning board or the planning board to get permission just to build that house. You might, however, need zoning permission, for example, if your house is going to encroach into a setback, but the actual use of your land for a use that is allowed in your zoning district is considered a by right use. So for all intents and purposes, if you comply with other dimensional requirements of the bylaw, you can simply go to the building inspector and get a building permit and construct your single-family home. In contrast, uses might be allowed by special permit, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the presentation. Or there might even be some uses that are allowed but subject to like site plan review. So I'll talk about each one of those as well. So just in terms of recognizing the folks that are all assembled here and acknowledging the roles that the boards play. So for our zoning board, first and foremost in a lot of folks' minds is you grant variances. What does that mean? Going back to my example a few moments ago about that single-family house in the residential district, if it encroaches into a side, front, or rear yard setback, doesn't mean you can't build it, just means you might need to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals and get a variance, meaning literally permission to vary from your zoning bylaws in order to be able to build it. The granting of those variances are always exclusively by state law reserved to the Zoning Board of Appeals. There are, however, some bylaws that would allow through a special permit process, some flexibility with some of those setbacks as well. The Zoning Board of Appeals is always going to grant what's considered a finding under Chapter 48, Section 6. Here, you refer to them as special permits, which is fine as well. And what that means under Chapter 48, Section 6 is that there are certain uses that we consider to be pre-existing non-conforming. And that is sort of a term of art for zoning that means if you had, let's say, a gas station that you'd operated for years before the town either adopted zoning or before the town adopted a zoning bylaw that said, you know what, we don't want to allow gas stations in that zoning district anymore. That doesn't mean that your gas station is not allowed and you have to close shop. You're allowed to continue as a pre-existing non-conforming use. Similarly, you might have a pre-existing non-conforming structure. So let's go back to our single-family house, or let's say living in New England. We have a lot of houses that date back long before anybody at the State House ever thought of zoning. And 9 times out of 10, those houses, they're very close to the front, very close to the setback, especially like in our town centers, or they might be on lots that have been carved up over the years that the lots themselves don't comply with what would be required in that zoning district now. So those are structural nonconformities. Again, it doesn't mean that if the bylaw comes in and suddenly decides that we're going to take houses and we're going to increase the minimum lot size for a single-family house to 50,000 square feet. That doesn't mean if your house is sitting on a smaller lot that you can't continue to live in your house in that lot. It just means that now you're a non-conforming structure. So anytime you want to make some sort of alteration to that non-conforming structure, you want to put an addition on, you're going to have to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals for permission for what the state considers to be a finding, but here under your bylaw you consider it a special permit to be able to alter that pre-existing non-conforming structure or use. The Zoning Board of Appeals also hears appeals from any issuance of orders or decisions by the building inspector. That's always exclusively reserved to the ZBA. So if the building inspector issues a building permit and someone takes issue with that, doesn't want the building permit issued for some reason, they can appeal to the ZBA. Similarly, if somebody sought a building permit and the building inspector denied that, they could appeal to the ZBA. There is a little caveat here that I won't go into a lot of detail about, but there may sometimes also be appeals under the building code, and we're not talking about appeals that arise under the building code. These would strictly be appeals arising under the zoning bylaws that would go to the ZBA. Appeals under the building code go to a state board that's separate. The Zoning Board of Appeals can also be the special permit granting authority. They are also the exclusive board to hear any comprehensive permits under Chapter 40B. That's the Affordable Housing Statute. And the zoning board could initiate zoning amendments if it so chooses.
Counselor, can I ask
Sure.
a question? Regarding initiating zoning amendments, correct me if I'm wrong, but I assume you're referring to Chapter 48, Section 5, which, if I understand it correctly, says that the ZBA, among other entities, has the right to initiate a zoning amendment proposal. And under the statute, if the ZBA submits that to the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Selectmen is required to send that amendment to the planning board. Is that correct?
Well, I thought you were actually going to finish that sentence a slightly different way. So the zoning board of appeals, and this goes for the planning board, it goes for the select board too. Any one of those three boards has the authority under Chapter 48, Section 5, to initiate a zoning amendment. And you're absolutely right that typically what the process is that a zoning amendment gets filed with the select board. The select board then refers it to the planning board for a hearing.
May I ask?
Yes.
Is the select board under the statute required to send it to the planning board?
They are required to send it to the planning board, but the select board is not required to insert it in the warrant.
I understand that.
Okay,
I understand
all
that.
right.
Yeah. And then if I can just follow up, also under the statute, once it's sent, and it has to be sent within so many days. And then when it arrives at the planning board under that same section is obligated to conduct a public hearing.
Correct.
Thank you.
And not just to conduct the hearing, but the planning board is obligated to issue some sort of a recommendation. You have a public hearing, offer a recommendation, and if so many days have passed since that public hearing occurred, and the planning board has not issued a recommendation, it could still go to town meeting at that point.
Thank you.
But again, that all presupposes the select board, this is sometimes a little bit of a conflict, the select board under Chapter 39, it is the select board's warrant. So if they decide for some reason, look, that zoning amendment, we think it has some merit, but we're not going to put it on for our Springtown meeting because we've got a lot of other things that we need to deal with that take greater priority, that would be the select board's call.
And if that happened, but citizens, 10 citizens or more could circulate a petition.
If it's an
and
annual,
have it added to the warrant if the select board chose not to.
And that is often sort of a belt and suspenders approach that folks will take. So for an annual town meeting, if you get 10 signatures on a petition, or for a special town meeting, you get 100 signatures. If that same zoning amendment is then presented to the select board by petition, the select board has no discretion but to put that on the warrant. Yes, sir.
I have a question about non-conforming uses. Are you allowed to transfer the property, say the gas station, non-conforming? Can you sell that to another person, they continue to operate it as a gas station?
Yes.
And what constitutes a change in use where that would be reviewed?
That we could probably spend about an hour on and not entirely agree. There's this whole body of case law that really gets into what was the nature and the means by which the use operated at the time prior to the zoning bylaw that rendered it non-conforming. So what were the activities? So for example, with the gas station, were they just selling gas or were they also servicing cars? The alteration, then we'd have to look at things like, does it differ in some sort of way that it somehow alters the nature of that non-conforming use? So for example, what happens when that gas station says, I want to now expand, and what I want to do is I want to offer a car wash. It really kind of falls to the Zoning Board of Appeals to do that factual analysis as to whether or not this is the type of the nature of services that were rendered previously, and this isn't a real departure from it. Most people, I think, in that scenario that I just gave you would probably say no, that is a different type of use than just a gas station pulling in to fill up. But it's not as simple as it sounds.
And then what about stopping a non-conforming use and then 5 years later starting again?
Typically not allowed. There's a provision in state law, and it's pretty consistent throughout bylaws, that if you abandon or discontinue a use, that you cannot reestablish that non-conforming use. And typically, you'd have to discontinue the use for 2 years or more. Abandonment can be a little bit more sudden. I close shop, I put a for sale sign, and say we're going out of business. That's a little bit more immediate, versus discontinuance might be a little bit more fuzzy because maybe I'm actively marketing my gas station to somebody else, but I'm just having a hard time finding the right buyer who can get financing. But once the non-conforming use has either, been discontinued or abandoned, you cannot bring it back.
Attorney Murray?
Question back. Yes.
I have a question back here.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. When you're just on that same thought you were talking about by right uses, and you were using an example of a residential dwelling in a residential zone. On the zoning board recently, we've had a couple of these come where they were residential lots for a residential use, but now the zoning has since changed. In some cases, there was actually existing structure on there, but left, and then we got into this whole discussion of abandoning the abandonment, the 2-year abandonment, not necessarily, you're talking use. But just hypothetically, if there's a lot and it now it was conforming at one point, now because they've changed the area and the frontage requirement, it met the area requirement, not the frontage per se. How do you handle it? Because it is by right, it's still residential in a residential area, it just doesn't conform. So they come for a variance, say, for varying the frontage. Is that normally?
Maybe I'm not quite following the fact pattern quite the way you intended, but I wouldn't expect that to be a variance, because if a lot had, let's say, 50 feet of frontage, and a zoning bylaw amendment said now you need to have 100 feet of frontage, the lot's going to be non-conforming. They don't need to, those owners of 50 feet of frontage lots don't all need to come into the Zoning Board of Appeals for a variance. So the lot, the structure, and the use are kind of all tied together in terms of the non-conformity.
This was just a lot, though.
Just a lot.
That had a house on it that was removed over 2 years ago.
Hypothetically.
But hypothetically, yes.
Yes.
Just pre-existing non-conforming lots that don't conform anymore. People have now coming in with the housing and want to put a house on a lot that doesn't say conform. In most cases, it doesn't conform to the frontage now because the frontages have been increased, so.
Well, so I guess two possibilities there. One is there's an exception, as there always is in Chapter 40A, Section 6, for certain lots. Some could have 50 feet of frontage, 5,000 square feet, or some larger lots that are protected for single and two-family residential use only. So I don't know whether that is a possibility here. Sounds like that might have been where it had been a single-family use previously. Perhaps there's some kind of protection there under 48.6. But even having said that, if they were going to come in and build a single-family house on that lot, and the use is allowed by right, and it's a completely conforming structure, they would be allowed to do that. If they were going to come in, however, and now we're going to have a structure that otherwise does not conform to zoning, they may need a finding from the Zoning Board of Appeals to, alter this pre-existing non-conforming lot by improving it with this larger house, but they may also need a variance for that new non-conformity that they create.
No, thank you. That just, because I think sometimes use and by right get confused. And when people come in and they're adamant because it doesn't meet the setback and it doesn't meet the frontage anymore, so you can't do anything too bad, go away. And I don't, but to get that, so I appreciate your.
For single and two, I would always just, I would just say, yep.
These have been multiple ones we've had in recent, the last 6 months, I would say, and they're all, but people start confusing use with, that's good, thank you.
Okay, sure. Anybody else on the zoning board before I move on a little bit to the planning board? Okay, so now for the planning board's roles. Planning board exclusively, now this doesn't come under Chapter 48, but under Chapter 41, the planning board has exclusive authority when it comes to the subdivision control law. So what does that mean? It means every time somebody wants to divide a parcel of land into 2 or more lots, or they want to create a street and new lots off of that street, you have to come before the planning board to have the creation of those lots and the layout of that street approved under the subdivision control law. There's also something called an A&R plan, which stands for approval not required. So you look at the definition of a subdivision being, the division of a tract of land into 2 or more parcels, except when it isn't. And the exception basically comes down to if you've got lots shown on a plan that have frontage on one of 3 ways, and the way could be a way that predated the adoption of the subdivision control law in Sterling. It could be a way that has been approved or a way that is open for use by the public, or a way that has been laid out and approved under the subdivision control law. Those are all 3 acceptable forms of ways that a lot could have frontage. So if somebody presents a plan to you showing creation of new lots and they've all got frontage on a way, provided it is zoning compliant frontage, whatever that happens to be at the time that they're seeking this approval, they can simply go to the planning board with their plan, and the planning board reviews it and can endorse it. If the planning board finds that they disagree, that this way is perhaps, it's a paper street, it doesn't really exist on the ground, or the planning board feels that the way doesn't really have, maybe the way is only in some places 6 feet wide and of poor construction and isn't suitable to provide access to the lots, the planning board could deny the A&R endorsement. And basically what that means is the developer has the option then of, well, you can either appeal the denial of the A&R plan, or you could just go file a subdivision plan with the planning board and then go through the full process of, public hearing, notice to abutters, and having to comply with the subdivision standards for construction of ways. The planning board, we talked a little bit a moment ago about the planning board's role with respect to zoning amendments. As with the zoning board, they can initiate, but they also have a special role with any zoning amendment, which is that the planning board has to have a public hearing on any zoning amendment that has been referred to them in order for town meeting to actually vote on those zoning amendments. Planning board could also be a special permit granting authority, as could the zoning board of appeals. Under your bylaw, they also provide comments to the ZBA with respect to common driveways. The planning board is the site plan review authority. They also have oversight when it comes to scenic roads. People want to do some work on a scenic road, cut down some trees, remove some stone walls, they have to go to the planning board. There's also the master plan. That's how the town sees itself or sees its challenges for the future, and it's typically updated maybe every 15 to 20 years or so with some just general goals of what type of development we want to see or what kind of zoning amendments we want to see. That all comes under the planning board as well.
I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah. On the one about common driveways, you said they comment to the ZBA. Does that mean the planning board approves the common drives, or makes an opinion or offers something to the ZBA and the ZBA then approves them?
It's simply a recommendation to the ZBA.
So a common driveway approval would have to be through the ZBA?
Under your bylaw, yes.
No.
No?
It's special permit by planning board.
Oh, then I guess I wasn't
Yeah,
looking at a,
That's the only reason I was confused.
oh, then I apologize. I must have seen a not up-to-date version of the zoning
Common
bylaw.
driveways as in a shared driveway between 2 lots.
Right.
Yeah,
Right?
that's planning board.
That's planning board now, my apologies then, no. Then I thought I read something that said that they just made a recommendation and commented to the ZBA on that, but maybe I stand corrected, so thank you. With respect to the select board, obviously the select board appoints the ZBA. The select board could also be a special permit granting authority if you so choose. I will say this tends to be rare to have a select board also be a special permit granting authority, but sometimes they are. The select board can also initiate zoning amendments. They must refer petitions for zoning amendments to the planning board, and we talked already about access to the town meeting warrant. The other thing that the select board has here is they control litigation and funding for litigation. So, access to counsel is always through the select board. And I know sometimes that can cause some friction where perhaps a board feels very strongly that we should fight, and the select board may say, we don't see it that way, we disagree, and they've got the right to either tell us not to initiate litigation or to, to try to resolve the litigation. Yes, sir.
So I have a question for you. You talked about the zoning board of appeals, what they do and what the planning board does. So my question to you is, I'd like your opinion. When the zoning board of appeals is the special permit granting authority for a use that's eventually going to be coming to the planning board for site plan review, okay? Does the zoning board of appeals, I think 48 section 9 is pretty clear, but does the zoning board of appeals have the authority to impose site-specific or site design conditions in with their special permit? Conditions that would be better left up to the planning board when it comes to site plan review.
So the answer is yes. The zoning board can, through a special permit, impose conditions. What any board is supposed to do, whether it's the zoning board or the planning board acting as a special permit granting authority, you need to look at the bylaw that applies. And there's always supposed to be criteria in the bylaw for the type of special permit that's being sought. And they're supposed to, make certain findings with respect to that criteria. They could also offer some conditions to that special permit that kind of emanate from those criteria. But there are going to be times where if the ZBA is the special permit granting authority and the planning board is the site plan approving authority, there might be times where the two boards do not see eye to eye. So for example, I'll say traffic and site circulation. That's always something that is looked at in the context of site plan review and a special permit. You would like to think that the two boards would somehow or other be of one mind with respect to the traffic impacts and how best to mitigate those impacts. I know some boards where it is a split authority like that, sometimes they prefer that one board goes first. It doesn't have to be the planning board or the zoning board, but I get those questions a lot of, well, why did the applicant start with us? They should have filed with so-and-so first. Well, they could file with so-and-so first. They could file with so-and-so in parallel with you. One of the best ways, I think, to resolve that, because one of the things you don't want to wind up in a situation is where the planning board says one thing and the zoning board says the opposite. Now you're an applicant trying to figure out, well, how do I comply with two decisions that are so diametrically opposed?
So when that happens, which board's conditions take precedent?
It is going to require either the developer reconfiguring their plan somehow to satisfy both boards if that's possible,
And if it
or
isn't?
it's going to require some sort of appeal of one or both of those decisions by the applicant to try to reconcile it if the two boards can't do that themselves. I mean, ideally, if you were the special permit granting authority, there's no reason why you can't say to an applicant, this project also requires site plan review. It would really be helpful to us if you went through the site plan review process first, because there might be changes that the planning board suggests that that you could address, and that might change the plan as we review it as the ZBA, or it might help form some of your conditions that you might put into your special permit decision, because you don't want to be at odds like that.
So you're saying that if there are site design conditions that the zoning board might like to impose through their special permit process, that they can seek an opinion from the planning board before they move forward?
I wouldn't necessarily say seek an opinion of the planning board. You could certainly ask for either the planning board's site plan review process to go through first, so that you then have the benefit of their decision and their recommendations to help form the ZBA's decision.
Okay, a lot of what the zoning board does is help shape the scope of the project so that it better fits in with the surrounding neighborhood. And once the massing of the project has been decided by the zoning board, then they go to the trouble of having their engineer put together the site plan and come to us.
It could be done that way too, honestly. I think the better approach is, and I see this in a lot of communities, if a project is going to require both site plan review and a special permit, you usually have one entity that is designated as the authority to do both. And then what you wind up with could be a combined process, where we're not having two separate public hearings about the same issues. The planning board or zoning board, whoever it is, could issue a single decision that addresses all of it. But as long as you've got that division.
Are you talking a joint hearing of the two boards?
No, I'm talking about changing your zoning bylaw to designate that when a project requires both site plan review and special permit, the special permit granting authority shall be, and you guys decide, planning board, zoning board, who do you think makes the most sense? It could be one board that issues both decisions, so that the overlapping issues are all going to be reviewed by the same board, and you avoid some of those potentially conflicting results.
Typically, I've been on the zoning board for a fair amount of time, and for the most part, we haven't really had any issues like that. But what happens is, as the special permit granting authorities, for instance, in a multifamily, the people come out because nobody wants it in their backyard, so they come out. So it's all a butter and setback. So it's coming to the zoning board first for the special permit, and the people are going out of their mind because they don't want this in their backyard. And so we're trying to, without seeing we're seeing a preliminary site plan at that point in time, saying, okay, listening to the things, okay, can you move this line, instead of being 20 feet, move it 50 feet, whatever. And that's typically at that point, and sometimes we've gone to the mistake of specifically saying, hey, put a line and don't cut the trees here, and then that came and blew up in our face. But that's typically where we see the thing, and then at that point it goes to the site plan review. And sometimes it would be helpful if the site plan review, because those are the details that all the abutters want to know ahead of time on these things. So we're taking no offense, we're taking the flack half the time, and all the angry people are yelling at us. We don't have all, because we said, hey, go to site plan review, and some of that will come out in the wash later, but it does kind of create and it makes for the developer, they're looking for the special permit because they don't want to spend the money on the site plan review, but it puts the zoning board, I think, sometimes in a bad position, because we have to, you don't make any friends on the zoning board, I can tell you that.
No, you typically don't, no.
But you have to tell, you're adjudicating like it's a by right or whatever, and then you're trying to take the issues and put them in, and that seems to be where we're in. So we'll tell them, hey, put this buffer in, and then it goes to the planning board, and the planning board say, put a fence in instead of leave the buffer, and something minor. But I've never seen anything big like that happen, but it appears to me to make sense sometimes to
Start with the zoning board.
start with the site plan,
Yep.
or the site plan review process. And we had that same issue way back when we were doing the earth removal, when they had to come there, and then there's all these questions that come up about, well, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna take out? Well, I want to know if I can take it out before I do that. And then now that that's been changed, then we had the same thing with the aquifer bylaw, saying, okay, you gotta go here first before you do it. So it almost makes sense to do the site plan, in my opinion, but hypothetically.
Just follow up. In my mind, at least, there's still some confusion. I don't know if there's any way to clarify it, but oftentimes, if the zoning board is dealing with an application for a special permit, we have the authority under the law, or under the bylaw, to impose reasonable conditions. You can argue what that means. But in many of these instances, the permit might not be granted if we didn't impose the condition.
Right.
So if the planning board, for whatever reason, believes that it has the authority to make modifications, then we're in a situation where a permit had been granted under these conditions. Now the conditions may be modified somewhat. And I'm just wondering if there's has this resulted in any litigation? So are there any rulings from a court that clarifies that confusing area?
Well, one thing the planning board cannot do, so following along that example, zoning board of appeals grants the special permit with conditions. Now they go to the planning board for site plan review. You're absolutely right. The planning board might suddenly say, move that curb cut over 20 feet, preserve those trees. We don't want the driveway located there, whatever it happens to be. But the planning board doesn't have the authority to change the special permit. That is the zoning board's special permit. So if the applicant is now got a site plan approval that says move the driveway here, and something else, the special permit from the zoning board of appeals says something contrary to that, the applicant's going to have to come back to the zoning board of appeals to say, listen, we're back seeking a modification, and here's what's changed, or here's why, the planning board wanted X, Y, or Z. Now, that same applicant, backing up to when they're before the planning board for site plan review, if they've gone to the ZBA first, the planning board already has the benefit of knowing what the ZBA's decision said and what conditions were imposed. So sometimes that might help the planning board. I don't think the planning board is going to, I would hope not, deliberately try to muck up the works, so to speak.
I don't think that's the case.
Right. But I have seen situations where, it happens, let's take ZBA and planning board out of the mix. You've got to go to the Conservation Commission for totally separate, jurisdiction. And the Conservation Commission says, no, you can't put the building here. Well, now you've got to come back to the ZBA or the planning board or whoever it happens to be to modify that decision.
So that's more time for the applicant if there's a conflict between the two boards' conditions. And they need to go back to the zoning board and ask for, what would they be asking for?
They'd be asking to modify the special
Modify a
permit.
condition. Okay, so that's more time for the applicant.
Yes, it is. Which is why if you consolidate the site plan review special permit so that one board issues the decision and they can also have the public hearing for both could be simultaneous. If the concern is wanting to streamline things for potential developers, that would be one way to do it.
And not have the overlap. Because it's as simple of a thing as, the ZBA will say, we want 10 feet of fence, and then leave the scrub for a buffer, and the planning board will say, well, we want 100 feet of fence, because the fence is far better than scrub for a buffer, and that's what we made the people up the street do. Now, all of a sudden, that's a problem.
Right.
So,
Right. It definitely, when it's just one board looking at all of it,
would eliminate that.
it does eliminate that conflict and makes it a cleaner, more straightforward process for the applicant. Yes, sir.
So, please correct me if I'm wrong, if I understand this. The ZBA is going to put forward conditions. The planning board then is going to do their site plan. If there's two things that contradict each other, they either have to comply with both or appeal it. Either board cannot say that we would rather have like, one says we want this area undisturbed, another says, no, put the playground there. They obviously conflict.
Right.
The applicant has the choice of not putting the playground there and being in compliance with both,
Yep.
or going to the second board, hopefully during the process, and go, hey, my ZBA permit, in the planning board's case, says A, B, and C. You're telling me I can't put the driveway there, but I have to because that's the only place it says I can do it with the ZBA. But the responsibility of all of that is up to the applicant. And then if they violate either, we should be enforcing that through our normal process through the building commissioner, correct?
Correct.
That we have no choice in not enforcing those. Both sets have validity.
Correct.
Therefore, they have to be enforced.
Right. So, I mean, there's enforcement, but there's also the applicant can,
Yeah, they should go back.
If they can't comply with both, that's even better. Or the applicant has to decide, who am I going to go back to modify their decision? Who am I going to go back to say, well, gee, we really want to put a playground in, and it really makes the most sense for the playground to be located there. So I guess that means I have to go back to the board that said, no playground in that
They could
location.
then make the choice to appeal either board, whichever
Yes.
decision they feel would be more important to them or more beneficial to them, or however they decide to look at it.
Right.
Thank you.
And it's not unusual. I just had a zoning board wrap up a lengthy hearing on an affordable housing project last night. They've been waiting for the Conservation Commission to weigh in. And each hearing, they would ask the applicant, when do you go back to the Conservation Commission? Has the Conservation Commission issued their order of conditions yet? What is Conservation saying about X, Y, and Z? And the reason for that is because there are things that the zoning board wants to make sure the applicant complies with. They don't want to necessarily say, well, we'll cross our fingers and we hope that the Conservation Commission picks this up in their decision. But at the same time, we don't want to issue a decision with a condition that says the applicant shall do X, and then the Conservation Commission says the applicant shall do Y, because then you're in the same situation. So it's not uncommon if you are going to have separate approving boards, and it's not uncommon for one to ask how the other one is going in its process to sort of help inform things a little bit. And sometimes there can be, I don't know how much staff interaction there may be, or staff support at some meetings. I often see planners go to zoning board meetings, and I see building inspectors at planning meetings and vice versa, and sometimes they're representing the same concern to both boards, so that you can understand perhaps what the other board is starting to think about or be concerned about. Or maybe there were neighbors that showed up at one meeting, but they haven't been to the zoning board, for example. And there's a way to kind of communicate what some of the concerns are.
So would it be better if on some of these controversial ones or whatever, they come in for, say, a special permit, if the zoning board says, because we have a statute of time we have to, so how do you get the applicant to say, go to do your site plan review concurrently? If it doesn't say that, they can just say, no, we want a decision, so we make a decision on what we have.
Right.
So it's not as easy as just saying go.
Right. We're not in the driver's seat when it comes to what board an applicant decides to start with. Right. We can make suggestions. We can say to the applicant, it would really make a whole lot more sense logically if you did this first, or at least if you did this simultaneously with filing with the other board, so that the decisions are going to come out, we hope, fairly consistent with each other. Lots of times the developers have their own strategy in mind. We're not always privy to what that strategy may be. But we all hear the same thing. Time is money. They want you to make your decision as quickly as possible. And they don't want to wind up having to litigate, because that just ties their time and money up in ways that doesn't get their project built. Well, it's always in their best interest to kind of go through and work through the process with us, rather than say, force your hand and say, nope, I started with the ZBA, and you folks just have to grant me the special permit, because I'm not gonna waste my money on an engineer until you do. That's unfortunately their call.
So if we keep the current process with the zoning board handling special permits, planning board handling site plan review, but we encourage applicants to apply concurrently, it might be beneficial if the planning board shared with the zoning board their draft conditions on site plan review and vice versa. Zoning board share with the planning board what they intend to impose for their conditions of approval, and make sure that they dovetail together before you close the hearing and take a vote.
Or hope that they dovetail together, exactly. I've certainly been at my share of, and this is no knock on the zoning board, but I've been in my share of zoning board meetings where the planning board report a recommendation will be read, and the zoning board will say, that's very nice, puts that aside. That's nice, but the planning board wants to weigh in on this, but this is our call. And they're right, but you're right, in a perfect world, it would be nice to have the luxury of that time and ability to share that information so that you could consider whether or not, well, maybe does that make me craft this condition a little bit differently, knowing what the planning board has in mind here. There's no reason why that can't be done.
It's easier to give a special permit when you know what the site plan looks like. It really is. It answers a lot of questions. So I mean, just to encourage that, and I think as a zoning board, you just say maybe no. If you're not willing to go get a site plan done because you have way too many questions to give the yes to, you give the no. And then based on the information that they're giving you, you don't understand the scope of the project, that it's going to be more industrial use because you didn't see a site plan. I don't have a site plan. I don't understand what you're trying to do. You can tell me what you're trying to do, but there's not enough there. Why can't I get a site plan to make that decision better? Is that illegal?
Well, I want to just be careful about one thing where,
I'm running here.
if we're talking about a special permit, it's absolutely a discretionary permit. You are not required to issue a special permit. I don't care if you've issued a special permit of that type to 10 other applicants previously. The 11th comes along, there's nothing that says you must grant the 11th. If what you lack is information or a study of some kind or more detail on a plan, it would be better to first ask for that from the applicant. Because now, and I'm thinking of this from a purely selfish perspective in terms of, possibly being the lawyer who's now got to defend your decision, but also from the select board looking at the budget. If you're going to deny a special permit, I would much rather you deny a special permit based on some sort of finding and application of the factors and criteria under the bylaw, and not because the applicant didn't submit complete plans to us. It's one thing if the applicant didn't submit complete plans so that we weren't really able to assess the impacts that we're supposed to. But, sometimes I'll be at some hearings and, they're concept plans, right? You might have setbacks or you might have a building envelope and you've got all the major, markers on the plan identified, but we're not really getting into the nitty-gritty of what this building is actually going to look like. Or just because they show it in a concept drawing, looking beige, doesn't mean they're not going to paint it pink, right? So we've got to just be careful, like what is the information that you need?
The conceptual part hurts me a little bit because my attempt at a simile here is I'm going to put a petting zoo in. Great, we're going to give you a special permit for the petting zoo, and then all of a sudden I put lions, tigers, and bears in it. Well, conceptually, it's animals, you can pet them if you want, but it wasn't the intent that we were told at the beginning when we gave the special permit. So I worry about, we've had some conceptual drawings before, and it tends not to look like that later.
Right.
A lot.
Right. So I guess if I hold on one second to close the loop on that, what I would suggest is request in a part of the public hearing, request the additional information that you feel you need in order to comfortably vote on this project. If the applicant refuses, well, now that's on them. And now, at least we've got on the record that more detail was legitimately requested. Applicant refused, and that's why this results in a denial. And you can't say that the board's decision was arbitrary and capricious when it really was based on a legitimate concern of the bylaw to protect. But at the same time, if you ask for additional detail and the applicant says, I'll give you whatever you want, give them the time. Whether you've got to enter into extension agreements, whatever, but give them the time to provide those plans, even if it means, okay, how much time do you need? 2 weeks, 30 days? Okay, because we're going to continue the public hearing tonight to a date certain. And we want you to be on record as being committed to getting those revised plans to us so we can consider them at our meeting on, July 31st. But oh, by the way, we need those plans submitted at least 2 weeks prior because we're going to send it to our peer review consultant or to our town engineer, whoever it is that we want to look at those plans and provide some feedback to us. You can map all of that out at the public hearing. And then if you come back on the 31st or whatever the day is and the applicant provides you with nothing, it gives the board a little bit more basis for denial.
So the planning board routinely uses peer review, whether it's an engineer or a traffic consultant. Zoning board can do that too.
You can. It typically is not something that you see with, certainly I don't see it with variances. It's typically with a larger scale project, so I don't really see it with...
Multi-family housing.
Yeah, I don't see it with like a single family or a duplex or things of that nature. But yes, the zoning board could also hire a peer review consultant for traffic, stormwater, whatever it is you feel you need to review, and pass that on to the applicant. So yes, sir.
Because one of the things that appears as an issue is the plan changing, or at least that idea that the plan may change from ZBA to planning board. Wouldn't part of what the second board be doing, the planning board, is shouldn't they be able to access or see or have that applicant forward those conceptual drawings or whatever things they showed the ZBA to make sure that they have an accurate representation that the lamb didn't turn into a lion? That you didn't say, oh yeah, we were going to do this to the ZBA, and the ZBA looks at it and says, that's a great idea, we like it, it fits within, there's no comments from the community, everyone's for it, but then when it goes to the planning board, it's completely changed, or it's expanded, or it's radically different, it's pushing the envelope. Shouldn't that be taken into account, or at least there be some sort of transfer of that information from the first board to the second board in some way, shape, or form?
Again, it's not required because there's, an application process for the special permit and everything that must be submitted. And then there's the application process for site plan review and what we require to be shown on the plan. It doesn't mean you can't have access to what the others have, what has been submitted to other boards for the same project. Doesn't mean you can't request of the applicant to say, we'd actually like to see the final version of the plans that, the zoning board, was looking at last week, for example. You can ask for anything that is reasonable.
Yeah, I was more considering, in this case, the ZBA looks at something conceptual, they agree with conditions based on that concept, and my own opinion, the disconnect can happen because that plan is not seen. That general plan that came up, that concept is not seen by the planning board.
Right.
The planning board, someone walks in with a giant set of blueprints, and there is no, to me, automatic question. Says, okay, is this substantively like what you proposed to the ZBA, or is it different? Did you propose a one-story building of 2,000 square feet, and we're now looking at a three-story building of 40,000 square feet, but it still meets setbacks, but that wasn't what the ZBA looked at, that wasn't in the spirit of what they approved. Because as mentioned, the ZBA is going to approve based on their conditions. If they didn't have those conditions, I think in many cases they wouldn't approve.
Right.
Then when that plan changes, they may have said, well, if we knew it was that, I would never have approved.
So Mike, we're drafting up site plan regulations right now as we speak.
Yeah, I'm thinking immediacy on this, that's all, where it's more, at least if the planning board saw the conceptual drawings or saw the presentation that was given to the ZBA, I think there'd be a better understanding for both boards of what's going on. It's just that intercommunication, I think that, I know it's not mandated, but I think it would help.
What I also see becoming a little more popular is towns putting, now with it where everything is provided to us digitally, towns are putting their applications, and I'm not talking about the blank forms, but they're putting their applications on websites. And so that you can, for example, go to the town of whatever and click on the active planning board applications. And you're going to get, the meeting of July 31st. And here are the projects that we're going to look at. Click on them and you can see the latest submission of everything. And do you want to know if the peer review consultant has weighed in? I'll look at it, it's right there.
Our planner does that right now, and it's the
Great.
easiest way to see the information, but what I'm talking about is, I don't think there's that, we have a full-time person doing it. The ZBA doesn't. So that it's not like someone is taking everything the ZBA sees and putting it electronically on some forum that the town controls. So to me, it was more, that's where I think some of the information gets lost.
Right, right.
Because I'd appreciate conceptual drawings, whatever was seen at the ZBA, because I want to understand why they did what they did when I make my decision with the planning board.
Right.
Just to make sure we don't have those conflicts.
Right, and you might not need to see every iteration
No,
because things are going to change.
I love it.
But something that, yes, so whether or not there's a way to do that digitally, or whether there's a way to just, when something is, finally approved by one board, or, if you want something even prior to final approval, but, 90% there, share it with the other board. There's no reason why you can't do that.
Could that information, for this example, the ZBA had a conceptual drawing, whatever was shown to them, could part of the process be that the planning board then requests that information that was submitted to the ZBA as part of their review?
Sure.
Yes, in your site plan regs.
Yeah, my biggest thing is they have conceptual stuff that the planning board sees details. I'd like to see if the two match.
Right. I mean, the only thing I will say to that, or the only caveat is, yes, as long as it is something that is reasonably within your purview under site plan review. So if you're going to go a little too far afield with, something that isn't typically part of site plan, you're going to start looking at, say, could be the design of the building, so that as opposed to the use of the building and site circulation, that type of thing. If it is still something that is within the criteria that you look at under site plan review, it's fair game. Absolutely fair game. It's when you start to say, oh, and I'd also like to see, I'd like to see the earth removal permits too. Well, maybe the earth removal permit is relevant to the project that you're evaluating, but it may also be that it doesn't have much of anything to do with it. Okay. All right, have everybody forgotten where we are in this presentation? So I think I covered this about protected uses under 48.6 earlier when we were talking about non-conforming structures or uses and expansions. We talked about abandonment, discontinuance. We also talked about if there's a new non-conformity, it would require a variance. We have spent a lot of time talking about site plan review. I don't see anything new here that adds to the conversation. Special permits, we've talked about the fact that they are not discretionary in applying the criteria in the bylaw. One thing I do want to emphasize is the last bullet point here, making the findings based on the criteria. I haven't seen this happen a lot for Sterling, but I do see this happen in a lot of other communities where you get towards the end and the board is suddenly voting, and it's motion to approve the special permit for the blah, 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 at such and such a... And sometimes, whether it's in the process, late that night, or we've kind of just lost our focus a little bit as to what is this application really here for and what are they seeking. Sometimes we forget to go back to that bylaw, if it's floodplain or whatever it happens to be, and go through and make sure, okay, so here are the half a dozen or so criteria under the bylaw. We need to make findings for each one of these, that, the project is in keeping with the neighborhood or won't have a detrimental impact on the neighborhood, whatever the criteria of the bylaw spells out. Because what I'm seeing happen more and more is that boards just kind of make that general decision, motion to approve the special permit, but they don't make the findings. And then there's an appeal. And 9 times out of 10, what will happen is the court will automatically bounce it back to the board and say, make the necessary findings first. We're then going to wind up going right back to court, but now at least we know what the board found. Did you find that the project did or did not comply with your various criteria? Just something to bear in mind when you're making motions to approve. Don't be so quick to just move on to the next application, but make sure you've also made all the necessary findings. The decisions, as you all know, for a special permit requires 4 out of 5 to vote in favor.
So I've got a question on
Yes.
that. Sometimes we only get 4 planning board members. It has to have 4. It can't be 3 out of 4.
Nope, it has to be a supermajority for a special permit. We talked about applying the applicable criteria, so I won't say much more about that. We've talked about being able to impose reasonable conditions, so we'll move on from that.
Can you apply time-based conditions, like you must reapply annually?
Typically, no, but I won't say absolutely not. It depends really on the use and the bylaw. So, for example, if someone is coming in and they are asking for a special permit to construct a multifamily development, once you've issued that permit and once that building has been constructed, you can't have them come in annually and reapply. It's there. What are you going to do? Tell them to take it down? No, we won't be doing that. So the rights vest, if you will, once, or runs with the land. You might have heard that terminology too, once the project is actually completed. There are some types of special permits that are a little bit more personal. Sometimes you might see this, for example, with home occupations, for example. Like, okay, we'll allow you to have home occupation, but we do want you to come in annually and reapply because we still want to make sure that you're not upsetting your neighbors. You haven't suddenly turned your little cottage industry into something that's of a scale that doesn't belong at home. So those types of things you would be able to put time limits on and require reapplication, but other things of a larger scale, no. So just going through the quantum of vote for some other types of things, we've talked about special permits being 4 out of 5, but your variance is also always going to be 4 out of 5. So if you've only got 4 members of your zoning board showing up on a given night, it's got to be a unanimous decision. Sometimes what I suggest, if you've only got 4 members of a board, sometimes I will suggest to the chair that they allow the applicant the option of, do you want to go forward tonight? Or would you like to continue this to another night? And the reason for that is sometimes the applicant is kind of reading the room. And they know for sure that Maureen's going to vote against this. Sorry, Maureen. I knew you'd take it well. So they're doing their numbers and saying, I haven't got the votes for this. Okay, well, if you want to come back next week or at our next meeting, and hopefully we have 5 members of the board there, and you like your odds better, 4 out of 5, so be it. You don't have to do that, you don't have to agree to that, but it is something that sometimes could avoid potentially some litigation. For an A&R plan or a subdivision plan, it's a majority of the planning board, and it is a majority of the board. So you might not have 5 members present one night, but you still need to have a majority of your full complement that approve a subdivision or endorse that A&R plan. And then site plan review is just majority vote. I get a lot of questions, and sometimes it feels like a math test some weeks. It's a 5-member board, but there's a vacancy, and then so-and-so had to recuse themselves, and so we only had 3 that showed up, and the vote was 2-0-1. Did it pass? Yes. Because, well, how can that be? Well, again, you have to look at the type of the application, what the quantum of vote happens to be, and whether or not you've met that quantum of vote. But it can be a little tricky for folks at times. Appeals, as you all know, all of your decisions, special permits, variances, can be appealed within 20 days. That's 20 days after your decision is actually filed with the town clerk. Typically, the standard is whether or not the board acted arbitrarily or capriciously, or whether your decision is not legally tenable. So going back to make those findings under the special permit criteria, that would be one of the reasons why, because the court needs to know what our rationale was. And I talked about the court remanding it back to the board. Sometimes the court will remand it back to the board even further along in the process. So it could be remanded for a number of reasons. It could be that the board didn't make the necessary findings, as I mentioned earlier, or it could be maybe the litigation has gone on so long that we've had some conversations with council where we said, if you just did away with the playground, this whole thing could go away. And maybe after 6 months or 18 months or 2 years of being tied up in litigation, suddenly that playground is not so important to them anymore. So it might be remanded back to the appropriate board to remove or modify the condition relative to the playground. And as I mentioned earlier, the select board controls access. One other thing about remand too, sometimes even after the court has actually, maybe the case has gone to trial, maybe it's been decided on motions, the court might still remand it to the board. Courts don't like to issue permits directly. They don't consider that to be their role. They will do it when they have to, but they really would rather issue an order saying, you, Sterling Planning Board, Sterling Zoning Board, are ordered to issue a permit for blah, blah, blah. And we always explain, well, we can't just issue a permit because all of these people showed up at these hearings for 5 years and they thought it was denied, and now we're just going to go into the office on Monday and sign something that says permit issued. No, it doesn't work that way. You have to come back to the board, you have to have a hearing. The applicants don't typically like that or understand that, because that means they have to pay for the advertising and the notice to folks. And then the board that the decision's being remanded to will typically look at me and say, why are we here? If the court has said we have to do this, then why are we going through the process? You're going through the process for the people out there and the people at home who, like I said, the folks who left your hearing room 5 years ago saying they denied it, thank God. 5 years later, those folks aren't necessarily following this in the news or aware of the court decision that has come down. So one day they're going to get up, they're going to make their morning coffee, look out the window, and they're going to see something going on next door and say, well, what the heck's going on there? Oh, well, that's, so-and-so's project finally getting underway. No, the board denied that. Well, the board denied that, but then the court overturned the board. So it gives the public, the remand hearing gives the public the opportunity to just see how this has all kind of come full circle. gives the public an opportunity to once again sort of vent, if they will. But at this point, you're venting about a judge's decision, which we may or may not agree with entirely, but it is still a court's decision. But at least it explains to folks how we got from a denial to an approval or a permit being issued. And that's typically it. The court will sometimes, folks will then ask me, well, so does the board have to issue a decision? Yes, you have to issue a new decision. And can that decision be appealed? Why, yes, it can. So it could go on and on. And it happens, sadly that does happen sometimes, but, at least it might be a different appeal or a different folks in the courtroom defending the decision. I also just put up here just a couple of other resources for folks. You deal with so many different things, whether it's not just, zoning issues. It's the open meeting law, it's the public records, You've got to comply with the 48 requirements, but you've also got to meet the open meeing law 48-hour requirements, and you've got to, post your meetings appropriately. So I put these couple of resources up there because there's sometimes some good, guidance documents on there for folks. We didn't put up the Ethics Commission. I probably should have included that as well. I think one of the things that comes to mind or is most applicable to land use boards is if an application comes in and it's property that is direct that you are an abutter or an abutter to an abutter on, don't sit on that petition. Recuse yourself, because whether or not the project is ultimately approved or disapproved, you're deemed to have a financial interest in the improvement of that property by virtue of you being an owner of property that abuts it or that's within 300 feet. So bear that in mind when folks come in. And other than that, I will stop. And of course, there's a couple more questions. Go ahead, sir.
There's one last question. Say, for example, you got the vote math wrong, and you thought something was approved when in actuality it was denied. And you say approved, and it goes through approved. Is that actually approved? Like if they don't apply within 20, if they don't appeal within 20 days, does that go through as approved or?
No. So even if you say the application is approved and then, the gavel or whatever, is struck, and then someone says afterwards, oh, wait a minute, actually no. Or we thought we only needed a majority vote for that when we actually needed a supermajority. That's, whether or not you call it an approval, that's not going to make it an approval without the proper number of votes to back that up. So in that situation, I would say, if you're immediately aware of the math error, if you're aware that night, fix it right then and there that night. Bring it to someone's attention and say, Mr. Chair, it occurs to me that required 4 out of 5, not 3 out of 5, and so we should just clarify that. If no one really picks up on the math error until the next day or a couple of days later, or maybe at the meeting there's some discussion about whether or not the motion carried and the decision was, I don't know, let's reach out to council in the morning and see what they say. The boards do have the ability to correct their decisions. And typically, you issue your decision and it has to be filed in writing within 14 days. If we're still within that 14-day window, great, we can fix that. If we're even beyond that 14-day window, we could file a corrected decision. What I have seen is that sometimes that situation will generate an appeal, and it's pretty quickly disposed of, because typically we'll just say to the court, look, the vote was X. It required a different quantum of vote. They said approved, it's clearly denied. The applicant is trying to assert that it was approved. The court will likely in that case either just issue, a decision based on a motion we'd filed to say, Case law and the statute is pretty clear. This requires a, supermajority vote. It didn't have that. Or I suppose the court could also order it remanded back to the board to re-vote and clarify their vote.
So you could re-vote after that 14-day window is gone and it's already...
I wouldn't, you can't re-vote. You can correct your decision, though. So if you said, if something passed, let's say the vote was 3-2 in favor, and it was declared that it passed, but it needed 4 votes to actually pass, you could correct your decision to say by a vote of 3-2, the motion does not carry. The application fails to get the quantum of vote required. The application is denied. You can't re-vote. In order to re-vote, you'd actually have to start the whole public hearing process all over again. So you want to make sure you get it right as best as you possibly can. Or if you think you've goofed up, identify it that night when you're all sitting there at the table voting and question whether or not it's right or wrong. Because once that meeting is over, the vote can't be changed short of a new hearing or a court order.
Within the meeting, you can vote to reconsider.
You can. But even with that, I haven't actually seen this, I haven't seen a court necessarily weigh in on this, but we see this, like the best example I can give folks sometimes is, we've all been at town meeting, and everybody's there for the controversial article. The controversial article is voted, and there's the mass exodus out the back of the room, right? And I always shake my head and say, don't go, because it's not over yet, right? And then somebody makes a motion to reconsider. And the reconsideration passes and the vote goes the other way because all of those people just left. And then they're furious. How could that happen? It's like, shouldn't have left. So the same thing within the context of your planning board or your zoning board meeting. If a vote was 3-2 and it's declared as having carried, and nobody thought to say, oh God, that was wrong. If you're still, it's let's say you take that vote at 7 o'clock at night, and now it's 7:45. You could say, we just need to clarify our vote, and we need to either a motion to reconsider or clarify that actually failed. It was not approval. I do worry about if after the 3-2 vote, everyone walks out of the room, and then there's a new vote. It looks bad. It looks like, I hate when people accuse boards of not being transparent, because I think, my God, they couldn't be any more transparent, but you only see what you're actually here to see. You left at that point, and somebody brought something up legitimately, and now we wanted to correct it. I haven't seen a court say you can't do that.
You should follow parliamentary procedure and...
I would, yeah. I would not, I would be leery of the scenario where you vote, everyone leaves the room, and it's just the board members and a recording secretary at that point. And suddenly it's like, I'm just thinking back to our votes that we took a couple of hours ago. I don't think that was quite right. I think we'd get some pushback on that. Not that you would be wrong to correct the vote, but I could certainly see there'd be an uproar of folks who leave with the impression that you voted one way and then it was flipped.
There's a whole parliamentary process to do it the right way.
Right. That's why no one should leave until that meeting is over.
Yep.
Anything else? Any questions from the board for Carolyn?
No, but thank you very much, Carolyn. That was very informative.
And sorry to pick on you, Maureen.
No worries.
She makes a good jacket.
One thing that I take out of this whole scenario is the idea that communication between boards is really important, and especially in this situation with zoning and planning being so close together. But thank you for that.
Absolutely.
One more thing before folks leave. I think everybody knows that the planning board's been working on some zoning amendments that we want to bring to next year's annual town meeting. Those are going to go up online on Monday. So by late Monday afternoon, they're going to be up there for everyone to see. From now through the end of the year, I'm going to be going around to all the boards, commissions, and committees, explaining what we want to do and why we want to do it. We're going to have a couple public forums in the fall, and then our required public hearing next March, and then we're off to town meeting. So just know that that's on the way.
And you're taking input for that, Stephen?
Yes, that's why
Forums, any other commissions and boards? Okay.
that's what it's about. So if they've got any big concerns that we need to iron out, we do it between now and the time we have our public hearing in March.
Thank you. Chair Fox, would you like to adjourn your meeting so that you may leave if you'd like to?
No, don't leave.
Entertain a motion to
So moved. Second.
We might talk about you afterwards.
And Chair Carini, would you like to adjourn your meeting?
A motion to adjourn, planning board? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. I hope it was helpful.
That was good.
So we still have some meetings, so if everybody who is not going to stay could please exit the room, that would be lovely. Thank you.
Good night, folks.
You too, thank you. Lost my brain. Oh, we could. We could do that.
That's amazing. If they said to this whole thing.
All right, so next up, we're gonna skip ahead a little and approve a vendor permit for D&D Liquidators. They've been very patient, waiting through all of that information there. Is there anyone from D&D that would like to get up and give us some information?
Sure, what information can I provide?
So you're looking for a vendor license. Did you just want to let us know your name and what you'll be doing over at the building across the street? Just to let everyone know what we're approving tonight.
Okay, certainly. My name is DJ Hutchins, and at 33 Main Street, we will be opening a retail store in the basement. We're selling overstock items from big name retailers, so everything we have is brand new, high quality stuff at a massive discount. And yeah, we're really excited to bring life back to the building.
Thank you. So you mentioned you'll be opening a retail in the basement.
Correct.
Do you have plans for the rest of the building?
As of now, we will either potentially expand into the upper buildings, but our current plan is to rent them out as offices.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the board? Yes, Maureen?
Are the other floors still set up for offices?
Yes, that's their current use.
Yeah, okay. All right. Yeah, because the building used to be full of offices with retail on the bottom level
Correct.
many years ago.
Yes.
Excited to have something new downtown.
Thank you, we appreciate that very much.
We're excited to be here.
And update the building.
Yes.
The building's got a lot of potential.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Need
It's a
some
real,
loving.
little bit of loving.
Yep.
We had it in the past, and I'm sure you can bring it back.
Yeah, we hope so.
Okay.
David, anything? All right, they do still need that occupancy permit from the building department, so I would welcome a motion to approve the vendor permit with the condition that they get that occupancy permit from the building department.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Smith, aye.
Newman, aye?
Krantz and I.
Thank you very much. Thank you for wading through all that.
Thank you very much.
Have a good night.
Have a good evening.
Did you learn anything?
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
All right, next up, we have a contract extension agreement with Regional Resource Group, whom we use for assessment services.
So we are exercising the one-year, fourth-year extension to the current agreement. We'll be putting that back out to bid this fall for the upcoming fiscal year.
All right, any questions from the board?
The assessors have signed off on this and obviously the rest of it.
I'd make a motion to sign off on the assessment services contract.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Smith, aye.
Newman, aye?
Krantz and I.
And next, we have a host agreement with the botanist. And this is an extension from our last meeting. We needed some more information that we have obtained, so we are ready to sign off on the host agreement. Anything you want to add, Bill?
We had added the items in I think it was 5C, which would be the community impact fees, so that includes anything with SMLD for electricity, fiber, any inspectional services, whether that's building department, board of health, fire department, whoever they may have to use as part of their regular operation here in town. And where is it? Any water, obviously, through usage there as well.
Okay. Any questions from the board?
Now this is in compliance for what the state wants, as far as just filling in that.
Yep. And they've checked it, and they're fine with that as well.
Does the public have any input in this?
I can take a question if you'd like. If you can come up to the podium.
Laura Ritchie, resident. I'm just concerned about if the, I'd really like to know if we have any regulations or any fines to issue against this company for non-compliance. They've been non-compliant with the request from the Board of Health for what they've been asked to do to give information about who's emptying the water tanks over there. They've been explaining that the person that was handling that before doesn't work there anymore. Instead of giving the information for the emptying of the water, they gave the papers for the emptying of the septic system. So nobody really knows where the water's going. I'm wondering what is really going on over there. I mean, are they dumping the water in our ground? Does anybody keep on top of them? I think Rich Lane is trying to work his best with these people, but they seem to be, they've been invited to Board of Health meetings and they never come. They've never been, required. I don't even see them here tonight, okay? So, it stinks to me, okay? Because it's a smelly operation.
I had a phone conference with Rich Lane this afternoon before our meeting. He had a phone conference with the botanist along with their lawyer and a local contact person for the botanist. They have pumped their tank. According to Rich, in his opinion, they are in compliance as of today, and we will be getting information, pumping information. I believe he said we'd be getting it tomorrow. So he's comfortable with what they're doing over there. After his discussion with them, I'm comfortable after speaking with Rich because I know he's a stickler for the rules. And now that we know that we need to be on top of them, that will be part of any type of inspection fees for our Board of Health to have to, now that they know that they need to check up on that.
So is that?
And DEP will be happy. There's a lot of agencies who are looking into this. DEP is asking the town to take care of all of that, and now that we're aware, things are moving in the right direction, and Board of Health is comfortable with their operation
So,
as
I
of
mean,
tonight.
who do they really have to be accountable to? I mean, this is a federal, a state, a
The
town.
Cannabis Commission, as
Oh.
well as the DEP and the town, so they now know that they need to
Aren't they-
do a few things, they're taking care of it,
Aren't
and
there federal
everyone's happy.
regulations too?
Or,
Are there federal regulations that they have to follow?
nope,
So,
but all the required agencies are taking care of all the business, and as of tonight, everyone is happy with their compliance.
so if they don't comply, I mean, is this town considering giving them a fine for not providing the information about the water removal?
So we would report them to DEP, and they are under requirements by the Cannabis Control Commission as well. So we can't shut them down, but Cannabis Control Commission.
So they're the ones that issue a fine.
I don't know if they're gonna issue them a fine, but they are currently in compliance and will be watched, and when we get to any needs for fines,
So it's pretty much, we have to like be on them, like, where's your paperwork? Okay?
correct, and if we need to have any additional fees from the Board of Health, the Board of Health can vote to add additional fees.
I mean, it's
To-
just like, if people have deep fryers, that are spilling their fat onto the ground, that they shouldn't be doing that they should be fined for that, okay?
So it's all been taken care of, everyone's happy as of this moment, and they are now being watched, and it will be taken care of.
All right, because, I mean, it can't just be happening here, I mean.
We're not worried about that, we're worried about here, and we're on top of it, so.
The Cannabis Commission, they're the ones that take care of all that. Clinton, Sterling, Lancaster, all of them, Lexington.
As of my phone call right before this meeting with Rich Lane, Board of Health is happy with their compliance, and they are the ones who will be overseeing the pumping and those documents, and they know to be looking for them, so I'm happy with that after speaking with Rich. Thank you.
So,
I would make a motion that we approve or we sign off on the model host community agreement.
All those in favor?
Smith, aye.
Newman, aye?
Grants and I. Oh, we gotta sign it.
And now we have an amendment to a special act that we approved at town meeting to up the age for a special police officer from 65 to 70 years old. And we are adding some more information to those bylaws, which I can read. So this will be Section 1I, no further deductions shall be made from the regular compensation of special police officers under Chapter 32 of the general laws for any service subsequent to them reaching 65 years of age upon retirement. Special police officers shall receive a superannuation retirement allowance equal to that which they would have been entitled to had they retired at 65 years of age. Any questions?
I have none.
What's that? Make a motion to sign off on the agreement?
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Smith, aye.
Newman, aye?
Grants and I.
Bill, you're up. Town Administrator's Report.
Majority of things were on the agenda, but still working on a couple of the beach projects that we have going on. Obviously, it's been months of it now, but still plugging along, still using some of the grant funds that were provided over the last couple of years there. The COA flooring's done. I think those that have gone over think it's
Fabulous
come out
floor.
really nice.
Looks really, really nice.
Yeah.
The color on the walls,
Very nice too.
not good.
Really?
Gray, taupe, looks like an old lady place.
Cafeteria area is lovely. I haven't.
I love the floor. I love the floor. I'm not going back though, because it looks like an old lady place.
All right, well, that project's done and we're moving on. I know the senior center has received a few grants for some projects they have coming up, programming items. One stop for downtown, obviously we don't have anything for there. We were not selected for the MVP grant, which we thought was going to be much more of a desirable project for them to fund, but it is a competitive grant and we were not awarded there, and nothing yet on the ADA grant. Still working on the fair insurance, giving information to our potential bidders even today, and Sterling Day at the Woo Sox would be Sunday.
How close are we on that insurance?
I just provided them some more information today, so we gotta be getting close. I mean, obviously, we're only 5-ish weeks away from the fair.
Yeah.
So, like last year, right up against it,
Yeah,
and the year
6
before.
weeks.
Yeah, it's getting close, so I'm hoping we can get our quotes and get that done, so we can get to the landowner and the business owner and whatever certificates we have to get from everybody ASAP. Pretty much finished at the library, getting close to finished up there for the elevator modernization, school security project. We received the quotes. American Alarm is installing that as we, well, not as we speak, but they're doing that currently. Mentioned the Pittown Beach already, and 62 and 140 engineering, they're moving along through the 25% design right now over there. So those are the major items. Obviously Maple Street's finished, and yeah, those are the biggest ones at this point for what's going on.
And CSX.
Yes, doing the railroad crossings on Pratt's Junction.
Yeah, they did one side. They're coming down to you, David. But they're doing them all over.
Yeah, they're from Westboro all the way up to Leominster.
Yeah,
Couldn't get home yesterday, had to go all the way down to George Hill.
me too. Sad story.
Good luck fighting with them people.
Any questions for Bill? He mentioned the Woo Sox, that is this Sunday, the 4th, and you can buy tickets online. Probably
If the
the
QR code is
recreation
not working, you can do it through the Woo Sox
Yep.
website.
And we have our own Victoria Smith and Common Jane will be singing, so go check them out.
I know, did they ask me? 'Cause they didn't
To
ask me,
sing?
yeah.
I'm not singing.
I heard you auditioned, it didn't go well.
We couldn't be any worse than the woman that sang at the MLB All-Stars.
Right. All
Or
right.
maybe I could be, I'm not sure.
Any updates from either of you on any liaison?
Nope, you said it all.
All right, perfect.
Sterling Fair looking for more volunteers, sorry.
All right, Sterling Fair is looking for more volunteers.
As is the Finance Committee.
Yes, they
As
are.
is the Economic Development Committee. Always. Raise your hand.
All right. Everybody here is already spoken for.
Exactly.
Anybody here for public session?
I'd make a
All
motion
right.
that we adjourn.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right.
We got a lot of sun.